everyone. Salena here, Salena Baca Crochet, and I am here live for part 2 of our weekend blanket wrap. So if you're watching live, come on over, say hey, say hello. And if you're joining on the replay, it's still the same great jam. In fact, you guys can binge everything up to this point for this crochet along, just like you were here live, and you can kind of follow along however you like. Okay, you're not behind, you're not ahead. It's just a fun, relaxing time. All right, after you watch this video, be sure to click on the link in the video header, because it is going to take you to the files section, and that's going to tell you everything that you need to know about this crochet along. So you're going to get the listing for this. Maybe you don't have the blanket wrap yet and you're looking forward to getting it. There's also a coupon there, and that way you can get a pretty good discount if you don't own it all yet. There are some steps that you can follow so that you can post your project, how to post your project, why posting your project is cool, and you know, all that jazz. And then there is one part that we had for this crochet along before this one, and that was all about materials. So what materials I used, how you can substitute, different kinds of yarn qualities that maybe you're looking for, so that if you are going to substitute, it's gonna look and feel exactly like you want it to. So definitely go back and look at those, look at that information there if you haven't seen it yet, and let me know what you think, okay? Also, this is a paid pattern. What does that mean? Well, paid pattern in my neck of the woods means that if you have any questions about the instructions, about the pattern, you guys can reach out to me directly. And as a matter of fact, when you buy the pattern, in the notes section on the first page, my email address is even provided there. So that way, if you do have any questions, I'm just an email away and I'll get right back to you. As a matter of fact, I had a few people reach out to me with some questions that I've already answered them, but I thought, well, those are great questions. I was already going to cover some of those things. And so that's what I'm going to do today. So today, in part 2 of our blanket wrap crochet along, weekend blanket wrap crochet along, I always want to shorten it, we're going to talk about the beginning rows of this design. So I want to help you get started with those first few rows, and I want to make sure that you have them started correctly. And I'm going to give you some of my tips so that you guys can do that effectively, right? So again, if you're watching live, come on over, say hey, say hello, tell me where you're viewing from. I'll give you a shout out as long as I'm here live, and we'll go from there, okay? I have a tiny swatch, and so I'm going to flip my screen. I'm going to share some things with you, and we'll go from there, okay? Okay, don't pay any attention to any of that stuff. Okay, weekend blanket wrap. Okay, so what I have here is just the first few rows of this pattern, okay? I'm not using the yarn as suggested in the pattern. I'm not even using really a good substitute. So again, this is just a small swatch so you guys can get an idea for what I'm talking about. So here are some questions that... Here are some questions that some people have asked. So maybe you guys have the same questions. That's why I'm kind of addressing them here. I do note in the pattern that this starts with an adjustable loop, okay? That's how this begins. And I had I had one person asked if the adjustable loop is the same thing as the magic ring. Yes, those two terms are interchangeable. However, adjustable loop is the more technical universal term, so I like to use that term over magic circle or magic loop or something along those lines. However, again, they're the exact same thing. So if you're more comfortable using one term than the other, that's cool. It's the same thing. So once you get started with this pattern, I want you to note a few things. First and foremost, as you're reading the instructions, there are a lot of rows of instructions, as you can see. Now, I did that for a reason. I could have easily just made this repeat a few rows of instructions and then just said go back and repeat rows 2, 3, 4, and 5, this many times. But I find that when I did that, it's not a fair position for people who are in the beginning stages of crochet,
or people who maybe are not familiar with the way that I write patterns and they want checkpoints. So yes, this is going to be a repeat that you will, after a few rows, go, okay, I understand what needs to happen next. But what I want you to note about those rows is every single row ends with a stitch count. So it will tell you how many double crochets you have, and it will tell you how many chain spaces that you have. Now, another great question that I had about this pattern is what counts as a stitch and what doesn't, because there are chain spaces. So some people don't know that everything counts in crochet. Let me backtrack. In crochet, everything in the pattern counts as a stitch. Everything, no matter what. If a pattern doesn't count it as a stitch for some reason, they should tell you that. The only time chain should not count as a stitch is if it's a beginning chain. However, with this pattern, we are counting that beginning chain as a stitch. But really, that's the only time you shouldn't count your stitches, so to speak, is if your pattern says chain 3, not first stitch, then we know that we ignore that completely. However, as you're working your stitches, I do strongly suggest that you follow my pattern exactly. Sometimes, if there are chain spaces and you're working a solid pattern over chain spaces, sometimes we want to just work into the chain space. I'm going to say don't do that for this pattern for a few reasons. One, you might alter your stitch count. And that could be a bad thing if you have too few or too many stitches, because then your pattern may start to ripple. Maybe you're going to use more yarn than you need to. Maybe it's going to curl because you don't have enough stitches on the end. So if you're not careful about placing your stitches in the 1-to-1 ratio, you could add or subtract stitches, something like that. And, that could kind of hurt you in the long run. Next, again, it really helps you to understand that every single stitch, chain, double, yes, you are going to work one stitch into every single stitch. A chain is a stitch, a double is a stitch, a half to every single one of those things is a stitch. So yes, you do count them. So everything from here to here counts. So make sure that when you're reading the pattern, you understand that when it's telling you certain things in a very specific way, yes, we mean those things in that very specific way. Okay, so another thing that's really going to help you with this pattern, and I say this in every single crochet along, is use a stitch marker. You can see right here, I love bobby pins. Those are my favorite. I just think that they, you can insert them really easy, you can take them out really easy, and it's really hard to miss where they are. I like using them for any pattern ever. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I use a stitch marker for the beginning and the ending on rows. So when your pattern says chain 3 counts as the first stitch, what you're going to do is you chain 1, 2, 3. Well, if that counts, then the top of the third chain counts as your first stitch. That's where you place your stitch marker, okay? That means that when you work that next row, and you get to this point, when you're following the pattern, if your last stitch is in that place where that stitch marker is, you know that is a good checkpoint for you, that you're ending your row in the place where you began the row, and that way your stitch placement is going to be correct. So here I've got, whenever I started this row right here, I marked the top of my first stitch. And you can see here that I also have one stitch marker here. So whenever I end this row, I'm going to follow the pattern exactly. And when my last stitch goes right here into the stitch marker, I know that that's a good checkpoint. All right. Okay. So I think that is it. All right. I think that is it. And now I'm going to flip my screen. It looks like there's some questions here.
Hey. All right, I see that there are some questions here, so let me get situated here and let me see who's here. Jessica. Hey, Jessica from North Carolina. So good to see you here. Jessica says, what's the best way to get the puff to look tidy? Mine look kind of crazy. Here, I'm going to take this off for now because I'm going to work a puff stitch and then show you. If I had a better setup, I would definitely show you. So I'm going to technically tell you, and I'm going to work it, and then I'm going to show you what my puff stitch looks like, okay? So I found that with the puff stitch, it's all about holding the loops on your hook and holding them as you're creating the puff stitch, when you're holding all of those loops on your hook, that kind of helps you to work the stitch a little easier. So when you're following the instructions,
let's see, because there's lots of different variations of puffs, so we're gonna do this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. You can see that I'm constantly pushing them back, right? So if your puff stitches, if you feel like they could look better, it's really just all about repetition. It's about uniformity. And this is a great pattern to help you get that repetition and uniformity. So this is the back side of my puff. This is the front side of my puff. Of course, I'm not following the pattern exactly. But if you want to get it to look exactly like how I did, you know, not only in the pattern, the way it looks, the finished product, that's what I'm trying to say. If you want it to look like that, you know, just go back to the cover page and, you know, read over that specialty stitch and technique bit of instruction for this stitch and just kind of follow it a few times. I definitely, and in it, you know, me, I've probably worked a million puff stitches, but if I haven't worked it in a while, and it was absolutely true for this, there are a few things that I struggled with. One, I'm using a far larger hook than the yarn calls for. So already my work is a little loopy, right? So I'm also dealing with a really big crochet hook for this. So that's not only a lot to hold on to, but then I'm putting a lot of yarn on it as well. So that's a lot to hold on to. And then you're essentially, you know, the puff stitch is gathering a lot of loops. It's gathering a lot of yarn, and then you're finishing it together. So if you feel like my puffs are looking a little crazy or they don't look as tidy, you might want to just work a few. And if you don't like the way they look, take it out and start again, okay? Now there are only a few rows of the puff stitches worked, but again, if you're not happy with your work, you know, that's a huge feature of this pattern. So you can always go back and kind of take them out, because after you work a few, then you kind of get used to them. You get used to the motion, your tension's a little more uniform, it's gonna look a little tighter, it's gonna look better than maybe the first few. And that's absolutely true for me every time I work a new stitch, especially something like the puff stitch. You know, and hopefully that'll help you feel like, okay, my work is good. Something to look out for, something that I've never struggled with, and I didn't understand it until another user told me. When you're working the puff stitch, you're really, of course, you're looking at the face of your work. What is the face of your work? It's the stitch as you're creating it. So when you are creating your work, whatever you're looking at, that side, that's the face, that's the front of your work. So when you're creating the puff stitch, the back side of it, if you're not pulling your loops consistently, if you're not pulling your loops in a certain way, uniformly, then some of them will be pulled out more so. So you could have a really long loop on the back that maybe you've missed because you're only looking at the face of your work. So if you've never worked this stitch before, or if you haven't worked it in a long time and you're getting used to the fact that you're using a larger hook for a yarn and your work is very big and fluid and loopy, make sure that you're looking at the back side of your puff stitch so that you're not creating those extra long loopy parts. So, you know, work a few and then check, and then work a few and then check. And if you're spot on, you're perfect, and you know your stitches are uniform, just keep trucking. But just look for that, because there's nothing like working a row of puff stitches and then turning your work and going, well, dag nabbit, you know, now I got to take all that out. So hopefully that helps, Jessica. Let me know what you think. Ah, DePolly is here. Hello, DePolly. So good to see you. All right, guys. So those are my tips for you. And again, if you've been here to all of the crochet alongs ever that Salena Baca has done, you're like, okay, yep, stitch markers. Okay, count my stitches. Those count as stitches. Okay, that's how I'm going to make sure that I'm paying attention to the fabric that I'm creating and the stitches that I'm creating. So just, you know, all of those same elements apply. And again, you guys have every single row spelled out for you. You intermediate and experienced crocheters, use it as an opportunity to just double check your work. You know, I find it really fun. I find it a fun element of crochet that sometimes when my work is a little, you know, it's, you know, double crochet 57 times. I like to double check. It's a fun incorporation to kind of have math involved. Like, okay, I did 57, perfect. Okay, now I did this, perfect. I like it as a checkpoint. I like that I can go back and double check my work. You know, this is a very simplistic pattern, so to speak. So having an element like this involved helps me to kind of keep my interest. It's a great little checkpoint. It's something to look forward to. So I will say that to the intermediate and the experienced crocheters. And for those of you in the beginning or beginner and the easy levels, this is a great way for you to not only gain skill, your crochet skill, but it helps you to gain confidence in not only how you read crochet patterns, but how you follow them and then go back and double check your work. So, all right. Jessica says, thank you. That did help. Okay, good. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Hi, Rita. So good to see you. And Rachel's here. She says she can't wait to get started. Awesome. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. All right, guys. So that is all I have for you in part 2 of this crochet along. Again, if you guys are just now watching this video for the first time and you're like, what, why crochet along? I don't know, just click the link in the video description and you'll get all the information. You can get started. You can move ahead. You can follow along. You can just watch and not make any. You can do whatever you like. It's just a fun little community thing. All right. Okay, guys, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining Peace, Love, Crochet. As you're working your blanket wrap, that's what this group is for. Yes, that's what this group is for. But as you're working your blanket wrap, please share here in the group. Share the yarn that you're using. Share the blanket wraps that you make. Share your progress pics. That's what this group is for. I'd love to see. And if you guys have any questions about the pattern, if you're stuck, if you need help, I'm just an email away. Okay? Peace, love, crochet, everybody. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.